Everybody's phones are off, right?
Thanks.
Airplane mode.
What did you say?
It's an airplane mode.
Airplane mode.
The audience that Kevin Foster will be speaking to is financial services professionals. Every time you open the paper or turn on the news and hear another story about a company, some executives or some famous people with allegations of wrongdoing, do you wonder how they could be so stupid? What were they thinking? Our speaker today was forced to answer that question himself when he went from highly paid real estate executive to a convicted white-collar felon. He served 37 months in a federal prison and now has a passion to tell his story, so others don't make the same mistake he did. He believes that his time in prison provided ample exposure to why people lapse into unethical or illegal behavior. It certainly allowed him time for self-examination. Today, our speaker is an author and consultant helping financial services professionals to improve their ethical decision-making abilities. So please, help me to welcome your friend and mine, Mr. Kevin Foster.
Thank you. It's good to be here today. As you heard from my introduction, I spent 37 months in a federal prison. And in that time period, I've got a full grasp on what it takes in order to, excuse me, I'm going to back up a second on this. I'm sorry. I learned firsthand about overcriminalization in our country. Can you believe there are 5,000 criminal laws? Another 10,000 to 300,000 regulations that can be prosecuted criminally if you were to violate them. However, based on my experience, there are really not that many people who are prosecuted for the minor laws. They're more into more major laws, and most of that could have been prevented with being more ethical in the workplace. Harvey Silverglate wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day, and he estimated that the average American commits 3 felonies a day. And if you don't believe Harvey Silverglate on that, just think about 3 ethical lapses a day. Today we're going to talk about ethics, but we're going to talk about the personal characteristics and circumstances that lead people into unethical behavior. And understanding what are the consequences of unethical acts. Now, when I was in prison, I had a chance to talk to a lot of people and observe a lot of people. And I started noticing patterns, which I have deciphered into a code. Now, enigma means puzzling or mysterious. It is also the name of the machine that the Germans used in World War II to encrypt their messages. And by the Allies deciphering that code, they're able to shorten the war by 2 years to save many lives. And I'm here today in order to be able to help you out in that regard. So my story illustrates why it is easy to ignore unethical behavior. behavior that resulted in my imprisonment. I was an officer in a land development company in North Carolina. And in that time, I noticed little, and sometimes not so little, ethical lapses, and also things that I saw that might be illegal. And I ignored them. And some of it was very obvious. For example, one of the owners of the company said, "You know, I like riding the razor between legal and illegal. And being on the legal is being in the light. And crossing it is going into the dark side." I had people mention things to me along the way. But all that time period, I thought of myself as being operating totally legally, totally ethically. That was them, that wasn't me. And what ended up happening was, over time, those problems started to compound. And ultimately, I saw where the company was going to fail. And when I saw that, I resigned. And I was talked into staying with the company in order to save it. So I put on my suit of a Dacian armor to be the knight that comes in and saves the company. About 9 months later, I am driving, or actually flying back into to town from a business trip. And I get a call from our corporate attorney. The corporate attorney goes, "Kevin, I need to read you a press release from the North Carolina Attorney General's office." And the press release stated that the North Carolina General was suing the company, shutting us down, and there was a criminal investigation with allegations of fraud being conducted by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Holy cow. How could this possibly be? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't commit any fraud. How could that possibly be? So now I had to tell my wife. I knew it was going to go on for 10 years and I had to defend myself. I also knew that we were probably going to lose everything that we ever worked for. And I was also looking at something that was the second most precious thing in my life, which was my freedom. The first being my wife. So I told my wife about what had happened. And I said, "Honey, I do not want you to endure what I'm about ready to endure. I will give you a divorce and everything we own right now if you want it." And she just responded, "For better or for worse." And "for better or for worse" summed up what our next 10 years were going to be like. Criminal investigations go on for years, and they will drag you through the worst possible abyss that you can imagine and drain you dry. I wasn't being accused of defrauding anybody directly. I was being accused of conspiracy. Conspiracy and obstruction of justice are the two most common charges against white-collar felons. You read about it all the time in the day. But this went on for a couple of years, and ultimately I had two options. My first option was to go to trial. Up to this point, I spent $250,000 in legal fees. My attorney was asking for another $1 million in legal fees. $350,000 paid now, $650,000 to be paid later. He told me that I had less than a 5% chance of acquittal, primarily because all they had to do was show one email, one telephone conversation over the course of 6 years in order to tie me to the conspiracy. If you just touch a conspiracy, you can be nailed for the entire conspiracy. I was looking at 20 to 30 years in prison. And I would probably die there. My second option was to plead guilty, so no more legal fees. One count, 5-year sentence. I spent 36 to 50 months in prison, and was stopped the stress of the uncertainty. But for better or for worse, I decided to plead guilty and do the one count. And fortunately, I'd be able to see my family again. I'm advancing ahead in the presentations.
You're at about 12 minutes, just so you know.
Okay. I'm at 12 minutes right now?
Yeah.
Then I'm going to stop.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I really want to know what stinky thinking is all about, though. I'm inside. Yeah, great. How do you feel?
I feel good. I am a person who does internalize because I've been living the story for such a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I am terrible at remembering things. So as many times as I repeat this in front of a microphone at home,
Yeah.
it still comes out different every time I do it.
So you have a microphone out.
I have a microphone. Yes, I have a microphone at home.
Great.
And I will go ahead and record it, and that's what I've been doing. But I was working on this. What he did not say was that I am starting to practice for Showcase.
Awesome.
So this is going to be Showcase, and ultimately what is filmed at Showcase is going to go on my new website as a sizzle reel.
Beautiful. Great idea.
Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. So when you say, because memorization is like a huge, obviously we're up here like, reciting thousands of words, you know what I mean? So
Right.
what currently are you using, because I'd love to support you in that style, because it sounds like since you're leading with that, that's kind of a personal journey that you're exploring and wanting to have more mastery over is the memorization aspect of things.
Right.
So what are you doing currently for your memorization, like your techniques?
What I've been doing is recording it on the microphone at home, plugging a USB drive into the car,
Mm-hmm.
and then listen to it as if I listened to the radio.
Beautiful.
Listen to it over and
Such a
over
great
again.
technique. A couple of thoughts. One is, so since that works for you, I use a ton of techniques.
Okay.
But one technique that I do is I actually, I'll do the same exact thing and I'll create two different situations. So one is I work on giant Post-it notes and I like to get things out. So I have all kinds of colors and I write words out, I write bullet points out, I draw arrows, I draw stick figures. I'm not an artist, but I like to get it out. And then I have literally in my studio, I have Post-it notes on all the walls. It's like an insane asylum in there. I mean, it's nuts.
Okay.
And so one technique that I do is I have two giant Post-it note pads on tri-stands. I record it just like you're saying, and then I listen back to it. What I do is I have then my iPhone or whatever device is in a fanny pack, because I sport the utility belts on always, and then I have headphones on, noise cancellation. I start it and stop it, and I make bullet points, right? So then I do the visual representation of what I'm saying, but I'm condensing it down to a memorable chunk, where it's like this story that's 10 sentences long comes down to one word or 3 words, and it has a color that maybe represents the emotion or a feeling that I want to evoke in the audience, or a piece of content, or you can have whatever subcategories you want. But the point is, without going into too much detail, because I can nerd on this for hours, is to have the visual representation of what you've already spoken as your past self to your present self, right? Which was your future self in the past tense. Got it?
Yeah,
Confusing.
yes.
You're listening to your past self
Right,
on your headphones,
right,
right?
okay,
And you're writing out a chunk that's going to remind you of the 30 words that you have to say in that chunk. So you're
okay,
getting a visual representation so that you can see that as you're referring back to your story or your points,
okay,
right? Does that make sense?
okay,
Yeah?
yeah,
You sure?
yeah.
So I can articulate more, but you got that?
No, articulate more.
Okay. So what you want to do is you want to take all of this, if you wrote out every single word verbatim, like, because we don't want it to be verbatim, we want it to be alive.
Right,
And we want it to be like internalized to the point where you're reliving, because you said you feel it. We want you to be able to relive that in a safe way, right?
mm-hmm,
To communicate it to the audience. Because we want them, the whole point is to take them on an emotional journey with you so that they really also internalize that content,
Right.
right? Or internalize the story so that the content will then resonate deeper.
right,
So if you can take those 30,000 words, or however many words they are, and minimize them into 30, you can memorize that, and that sets you off for that next chunk.
yes,
You know
I
what
see
I
what
mean?
you're saying.
So it's, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So that's creating the visual representation.
Mhm.
The other one is the completely passive version, where what you do is you listen to it in the car, which is awesome.
Mhm,
But also, I would invite you to, again, get noise canceling headphones, right? So everything else is gone,
I
and you're
have those.
single track mind, right? You're doing really like deliberate practice at that point, instead of just kind of noodling, right? Which essentially is what you're doing when you're driving, because you're multitasking,
mhm.
which is still awesome, but it could go way deeper. And then you lie on the floor, or you sit in the lazy boy if you're not comfortable lying, or you sit in a chair. You close your eyes, and you just go into meditation. You don't make any notes, you don't make any edits, you don't do any of that stuff. You simply internalize what you've already created.
Mhm.
And that's getting into your subconscious. That's really deep. You're just digesting it, and that's the only thing. So those are two kind of extreme versions of doing what you're already doing. Just inviting you, since that works for you, to take those two ideas and work with those.
When you're
Okay,
doing the second one, are you playing the tape or you actually just did all that work and you're just being quiet?
I'm playing it. Yeah. You can also then, a lot of times what happens, great question. A lot of times what happens then is once I get into that like trance state, then I will sit with it when it goes out. And I'll actually sit with it and I'll feel it like seeping into my body, right? It's like molecular. It's just getting deeper and deeper, you know? And so it comes out of this cognitive thing of like memorization, prefrontal cortex, all that fun stuff that I know you love words like that. But like, and then it seeps in and it gets into the heart, right? And it gets into the solar plexus and it gets into the body more and more, right?
Well, it's like with Handel, he would have the musicians who played it to sing it.
Yeah.
And so, and they do that with the Suzuki method as well. My kids played violin. So if you can sing it,
Yeah.
you can play it. That's because they internalize it rather than having music on a sheet of paper. It's, if you can sing it, you can play it. And they're all hummers now. It's really kind of funny.
Yeah.
They hum things all the time, but it's the same kind of concept where it just becomes who you are.
Broncar, in the first version, where you're doing 30 words, let's say, on your big Post-it, is the idea that you're shrinking everything you were going on and on about into 30 word, a shorter version? Or is it that you're just punching up some highlights so that you make that connection with that color square moment where you are and the highlight?
Yeah, punching up, you're highlighting, so you're still keeping all the content, but you're just having that one word or those 3 words as a trigger point. And then you've got all of them in there. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll even have the words, I don't know who it's gonna be backwards for somebody here, but, sorry. But like you have the word and then I'll draw an arrow, right? Or I'll do a doodle or some kind of an
Going
image
here to here.
that goes from here to here. And so it gives us a connection, right? And just like the mnemonic learning we were talking about earlier, it gives us a connection, they're interacting together somehow. And it's a visual representation of that.
And the mnemonic thing that you mentioned but didn't go into is sort of like, if I practice and I say, and then all hell broke loose, then the fact that my hands are like this and my body's doing this is going into that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And then it becomes kinetic too, you know, once you start putting the body in, you know.
Is that what mnemonic means though, is it a word, mnemonic is a word thing, or is mnemonic, I thought mnemonic is like, if I'm going like this, then I'm making a connection between something I'm doing and what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, you can do that. Those are like the body memory palaces.
Yeah, associations,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you can do the memorization and putting them in, like anchoring, you know,
Right.
anchoring something in wherever,
On the
you know.
body.
And then you can also memorize in palaces, where you start with the head and you memorize X, Y, and Z in the head, and then you memorize to the shoulder, and then it goes down the body, however you store words or feelings or, you know, sentences in different parts of the body, you know, so then you can go down, that's a common one.
Sure.
And then you have the extra, where then you're like, okay, I'm going down my body live, and maybe you're just up and you're like, okay, the first one is you're here, and that helps you remember. And the next one you're here, it helps you remember. And the next one is here, it helps you remember. You have to grow up here though. And then the next
That's right.
you know what I mean? So you can actually touch those points as you're going down, and it'll actually remind you. You're like, oh, bicep means I'm riding my bicycle into the thing, whatever it is,
Right,
you know.
the
It's
link.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Super great, and I don't want to take that away more from your time to get feedback, but
Yeah.
that is really important. So many people struggle with memorization.
Yeah.
Back in the back?
Yeah, well, I absolutely love everything he had to say. But Kevin, I have seen you speak several times already, and the lead you've taken is huge.
Thank
And
you.
I applaud you for that. But what I'm thinking about after what he said is that if you're going to stick with that speech, which I found fantastic, I mean, I had chills just listening to you, is that maybe you should memorize that speech and stick to it until you nail it. And a suggestion would be just to take away a lot of the writing on the screen, and so just put images. The guy thinking, but without the talk, because I want to listen to you.
Yeah.
And maybe once you actually internalize your own speech, because it's your story. I mean, you can
Right.
tell it 1,000 times. But I know, because I have been there, like when I started saying that I was divorced several times, I had to say it so many times in front of people like you to be immune to the fear of what people thought of me. And so you being in jail always say, oh, what the heck he did, right? And so you had to say it so many times so you became immune to it, and you can speak in public to create awareness about the issue. So, but then with that comes what happens if you just lose it so much that you don't act it up, so people don't feel what you're feeling. And we want to feel your feelings. I felt them, but I saw that you were just too stiff when you were talking about it. And with a smile, I mean, you're talking about freaking going to jail, and you had a smile on your face. So maybe acting it up so
Okay.
we could feel the pain, you know, of
Okay.
the
Christine?
drama.
And then Noah.
Yep, so I think you've done a great job slowing down. So I know that's been something you've been working on, is kind of slowing down your speech. Is when you first started telling your story, you ran through it really fast. And I know you've been working on this quite a bit. You're very comfortable when you're telling your story, right? And I think what Bronkar's alluding to is that internalization. It felt like you were telling somebody else's story initially, and then I saw a glimpse of your story, which I've seen you tell, just one-on-one, right, quite a bit, and then it was like you kind of went back into somebody else's story. So finding that like connection is going to be important, and then watch your hands. You did the whole presentation like this.
Okay.
Yep, so that's a blocker, right? So
Okay.
just think about like kind of where your hands are. But you did, I think you are right on the edge of a breakthrough.
Right.
I really do.
Let's do it right now, just break it.
I said
Break it.
Noah. And then we'll
Yes.
come to you.
Oh, okay, sure, of course.
First, I would like to applaud you for giving us such a personal story about yourself, talking about going to prison. As you started, you said, as you heard from my intro, possibly maybe you could change that into, instead of saying that, can you imagine being away for 37 months? And with, slight pauses and slow down that sentence structure. So that would be one. I have a few, you can have the paper, of course. And then you said, today we are going to talk about, instead of maybe saying today we are going to talk about, maybe you could change that to, by the time you leave here today, you
Yeah,
will
like that.
know, or you will understand,
Right.
something to that effect.
Okay,
So it's
good.
not I, you know?
Right, I like that. That's very good.
And then also, maybe you could start from the middle, since your intro mentions prison, you could start from the middle of being in prison. Like when I said, can you imagine being in prison and somebody telling you to go to bed, or somebody telling you to take a shower, or somebody telling you you can't watch your favorite show right
Right.
now, something like that, like really pull us into the story. You know, like
Right.
I've been to prison before too, well not prison, jail, I've been in jail before. And it's like you have to listen to these people so you can bring everybody into your story by mentioning some of the stuff that goes on in there, especially since you mentioned it in your intro.
Right,
And then also, when you said something in the beginning, you are terrible about remembering things. Remember what Dennis said about self-talk. You can, instead of saying you are terrible about remembering things, you can say, you're working on remembering things better and better every day.
right.
Right?
Nice.
All right,
Affirmation, I love it.
Yes.
all right.
I'll make it super quick. Kevin, I thought you did a great job, great eye contact, and that's actually something that I've been working on, is really trying to just talk to people. And I just feel like you were having a conversation with me as you were telling it. I didn't feel like you were preaching or anything, or it's way over my head. The thing that I was going to say is to have a little more drama and a little more emotionality, and I think that was spoken to. But, you know, I do feel for you, because on the one hand, I'm sure that if I may be really blunt, this just scared you shitless but when you said, holy cow, it didn't have the punch of like, I mean, I would have been like, oh God in heaven, you know, I would have just, and I'm not saying to, you know, exaggerate it, but just whatever it was that you could tap into that.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah, it's something that's been very, very difficult for me. You can imagine
Sure.
being in prison, you can't show much emotion
yes,
to begin with, and you end up compartmentalizing a lot.
Yeah.
You compartmentalize your emotion as well as a protective,
mechanism.
I
Thank
think that right there, how much time do we have? Any?
Not really.
Okay, I'll tell you later.
Okay.
Excellent.
I didn't do that.